Welcome to the Principles of Performance podcast, where we discuss how to optimize your health, fitness, and performance. Whether you are a coach, trainer, or clinician looking to become one of the top 1% in your field, or a fitness enthusiast looking to learn strategies of how to perform at your highest level and be your very best, we draw on decades of experience of working as coaches, consultants, and trainers to top industry professionals and elite performers, athletes, and teams all over the world. Your hosts, Eric DeGatti and Mike Perry, investigate and challenge the most popular coaching, training, nutrition, lifestyle, and recovery protocols, as well as bring on our friends and colleagues who are leaders in the fitness and performance industry to join us in the discussion. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, as well as stick around to the end to find out how you can get access to special resources, deals, and learning opportunities. Now, let's get to the show. And away we go. Here we are with the Principles of Performance podcast. I'm your host, Eric DeGatti, along with my friend and co-host, Mike Perry. And Mike, as you know, when you do fitness education like we do, and we do workshops all over the world, you can sometimes acquire this beetle-like fame sometimes, and it's a lot to handle, but it's kind of part of the job. And so a bunch of years ago, I was at a TPI course, and this stalker comes up to me and says, "I know who you are, and I can I talk to you for a minute?" You know how it is, Mike. It's not an easy job to have.
At least once or twice a day this happens. But yeah, continue.
But so with that, it turns out that we connected well, became fast friends, and started working together. And we're fortunate enough to have him as our guest today. And I joke, but Keith Burns. All right, let me tell you a little bit about him. He's an experienced lecturer, strength and conditioning coach. He's worked in health and human performance for many, many years. He is, and I met him because he is the head of the exercise science department at Raritan Valley College here in New Jersey. And I was fortunate enough to become part of the advisory board there. And he runs just an absolutely incredible program. In addition to his faculty position, he also continues to coach athletes at every level. He's recently worked Puerto Rico lacrosse senior women's national team, World Lacrosse Championships, Women's U19 team. He's co-authored 2 books. He's a member of the NJ State Advisory Board for the NSCA, and he's peer reviewer for the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, as well as the Council on Accreditation of Strength and Conditioning Education. And he has his master's. He's just an all-around very smart dude. And Keith, welcome. Very happy to have you on the show today. This was a long time coming.
Mike, Eric, thank you guys for having me. It has been a very, very long time. Eric, I think you've become the stalker.
Yes.
It used to be me, now it's you. So
funny how the world works that way, right?
Absolutely, but super happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time now.
Awesome. All right. Hey, so Keith, we're going to dive right in. So you've got a ton of experience in both practical and academic settings and fitness and performance. What would you say are some of the most impactful or significant changes you've seen over that time?
Wow. That's a big first question. But honestly, wow. So there's so many different ways I can go with this. So impactful, significant changes, I would say the type of programming that we're seeing for the general population has certainly been a totally different than I used to see back in the late 90s when I started in strength and conditioning. We're seeing more access to athletic type facilities. So I think the training style has changed significantly, and it's allowed the general population to feel more like an athlete at times instead of just being a bodybuilder. On the athletic side, I would say it's probably the use of monitoring in the field with technology. That's something that just didn't exist when I started. I mean, everything we did was stopwatch and, the coach's eye. We had no valuable metrics other than what we actually saw in the field. The other side, I would say that's probably we can talk more about, being that I'm on the academic side now, is the impact and significant changes in the academic programs. They're totally different than than they used to be, but they're still very much the same, if that makes sense. Like we're still teaching the basics of exercise science, but I think we're getting more into the applied aspect of it.
Well, how much of that is driven, you think, because the audience has changed? Like when, the three of us were starting to go to gyms, it was nothing but meatheads and bodybuilders. And now you're having, more women involved, more people who are over 40 coming to the gym that you never saw before. You have people who, you would never think would ever step into a gym now because of the lexicon has changed, where now you're hearing about all this talk about longevity and these things in the
Yeah.
commonplace. That's changed the audience that we have, and thankfully we're starting to adapt to it in some regards. So that kind of leads to the next question, and it's a two-parter. What are some of the things that you think that we're actually doing better than we were doing 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Wow. So I think better is it's a tough word to define because I think there's things we're doing better, and there's things we're doing not quite as well in, right? I think the things we're doing better in, I think we're getting better with the programming side holistically, right? For it's not just sets and reps in the weight room. We're getting better at prescribing cardiovascular work. We're getting better at prescribing things that are more medically driven. So looking at the longevity side of things, we can program and say, okay, this is where we think we need to be based on some sort of physiological test, and how do we get from point A to point B? And I think the programming side has gotten really, really good. Um, so I think we're doing better there. I think we're doing a better job of educating coaches. I mean, you guys go all around and do this for a living. So this did not exist. I mean, if you went to one or two major conferences per year, that was a lot, right? So where do we get our information from? We got it from, Muscle and Fitness magazine. Eventually that turned into like Men's Health, and then like the Outdoor Journal if you wanted something that was more endurance based. So I think the aspect of the better, I don't think it's necessarily better, it's just different. And I think the platforms that we're using to gain information have drastically changed, right? With social media, websites, I mean, things that just didn't exist 30 years ago.
All right, so part two, what are some things that are trending we're going in the wrong direction with?
Yeah, I think we have a tendency to find something that looks really good and overutilize it, right? So a perfect example is HIIT training, high intensity interval training. Um, I think too many people just do HIIT and they don't do the other aspects, right? Where back in the day we did, I have a track and field background, so we did like the long, slow distance as part of our training. Um, and then everything kind of went away from that and went only to HIIT. And everybody was doing two, three, four, 5 sessions of high intensity work per week, which is just not sustainable. Um, Physiologically, I don't think we're hitting targets that we think we're hitting. And I think we misinterpret the research. Like Tabata is a perfect example. People say, well, I just did a Tabata class. Well, how long was the class? And they say, well, it was 45 or 60 minutes. And I'm like, that's not Tabata then, because Tabata was, 4 minutes worth of exercise, 8 rounds of, 20 on, 10 off. So I think we have a tendency to overdo what we think is good. Um, we, yeah, it's not a great model when we take those pieces of information and then try to put it together for everybody.
Yeah, you know what? I think a lot of people choose exercises kind of like they choose a show on Netflix. They just kind of search around and see what looks interesting and they pick and choose together. And then they try to put it together and be like, why doesn't this pan out? And it's like, well, because you just picked a bunch of random stuff. And, I think a lot of people almost have too much information. They don't know what to pull from. But you mentioned targets earlier, and I want to kind of dial in on that a little bit. So let's talk about some common misinterpretations in fitness, like zone two. How is it currently defined and being recommended? Let's talk about, what this should really look like in real life.
Yeah, that's a great question. So zone two, I come from the old school where we had three zones. We had zone one, we had zone two, we had zone three. So we basically had a low, moderate, and high intensity workload, right? That changed a little bit with the advent of the polar heart rate monitors. We had maybe a 4 zone model, and then that kind of went to a 5 zone model. So to me, I look at zone two as anything that's is moderate intensity, and it's even hard to actually define what moderate means, because what moderate means for me is different than what it might mean for you or someone else down the street, right? So, generally speaking, we're somewhere in like the 60, 65, maybe 70% if we're looking at heart rate, percent of heart rate max, which is a flawed method at many times because we don't have a really good working model for the general population to define what heart rate max is. Um, if we're in a lab, we can measure it based on lactate. It's generally somewhere around upwards of maybe 2.5 millimoles of lactate per liter. But is that accessible to the mass population? Um, Generally speaking, it could be a talk test, right? If someone's working out, can they actually have a conversation? Um, so what are the benefits of zone two, right? We hear about, mitochondrial health, vascularization. So I think about my training, just like in the weight room, sets and reps will define basically what sort of outcome you get, right? If you're going to train for muscular endurance, you're going to do one thing. If you're going to train for maximal strength, you're going to do something on the opposite end. It's the same thing with conditioning, and zone two. So I think we should really be focusing on the training adaptation that we want, and then try to find the best method that fits that, right? So if it is zone two, and I think zone two is super important. It kind of lays the foundation for a lot of the things that you want to happen beyond that. Um, and I think the bigger base of the pyramid we have, the higher we can go, so to speak. And I'm not one to say, hey, everyone needs a ton of aerobic work, but there's ways to do things that are aerobic or at least target the aerobic system that don't have to be long, slow distance.
Gotcha. So one thing I want to sort of repeat something you said, and I think for our listeners, it's going to be really important. You're saying choose the adaptation and then choose what exercise or modality is going to be best for that individual to make that adaptation. And I think a lot of people do it the opposite way. They're good at teaching cleans, so they put everybody doing cleans, or they're good at teaching everybody kettlebell swings. And I think as experienced coaches, we all know that there's not one way to create power. You can create power with several different modalities. So as a practical application, you also have to determine who's your population, who you're going to coach, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's a big part of it that people don't really truly understand when it comes to like the real life stuff is like, can you teach it? And can you teach it really good? And can you scale it? And I think people forget about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have a tendency, right? We want the shortcut. We want the magic bullet. We want the pill that's going to make everything better. We don't want to put in the work necessarily down at the bottom end. We always want the things at the top end. And I think that's one of the things we see with particularly with the general population, but also with the athletic population, is they want to do things that are at the highest intensity all the time, but it's really the things at the lower intensities that allow the body to actually perform at the higher intensities, right? So we have to build it into the programming. Now you could say, well, athletes generally have a fairly good aerobic base, and maybe they do, right? And my thought on that is that they probably developed it throughout a lifetime of activity, right? It's something that we accumulate over time, right? It's just like fitness. Like I don't have to do, 60 minutes today. I could do 20 minutes in the morning. I could do 20 minutes at lunch. I could do 20 minutes after dinner. It doesn't have to be a 160-minute session, right? So I can accumulate things over time. And I think physiologically the body adapts better when it's not just dumped a whole bunch of stress. I think we need a little bit of stress, allow the body to adapt, remodel, and then go beyond that. So basic, progressive overload principle.
All right, so there's a lot I want to unpack there. So, one is also when you say that you want the kind of quick fix, easy thing to take the pill. I think we also do that as professionals, as clinicians, as coaches, as trainers, and that we look for the sound bite and the Instagram reel that says, okay, zone two, how much should I do? And without understanding nuance and not understanding the things that you're talking about, like understanding the difference between acute responses and chronic responses. You look at the research with HIIT and why everybody jumped and gravitated towards Tabata and HIIT was because they showed similar aerobic responses, adaptations, right? As in these short, high intense sessions versus longer, slower sessions. So anybody in their right mind practically is going to say, well, if I can get done in 10 minutes, what I would have to take me 30, why would I do 30? right? But what you don't understand is that is a study that's done over the course of 4, 8, 12 weeks. And it doesn't account for the fact that that levels off and isn't a continuous type of thing. And so you still need, like you said, the chronic effect that happens from the accumulation. And then when you talk about accumulation, then all right, so what is kind of the minimum effective dose? Well, I listened to some podcaster who's an ex-cyclist who says you need now 240 minutes of zone two a week. And it's like, what person in the general population has that type of time or even the attention span that they're going to go and do that long, slow, boring work for that long, right? So now you look at that. And then the other thing that you touched on is okay, we don't even have a definition for this thing that everybody's jumping on the craze for zone two. We don't even really have a clear definition for it. The clearest we have is probably, like you said, is I can test lactate, but then how many people are gonna, are gonna be psychopathic enough that they're gonna be pinpricking themselves while they do cardio? That's not
Zero.
practical.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so now, all right, so that leads to my next question. What are the metrics that most directly correlate to outcomes? And let's just stick with aerobic fitness for now. And this is going to end up maybe being like a 48-part question, Keith. So just get ready. So, like heart rate. Okay. So, heart rate becomes flawed if it's X amount percent. You already said it. If it's X amount percentage of max, but I don't have an accurate max, that's flawed. And then if I'm getting my max based off a Carvonen 220 minus your age, which the guy even who invented it said that's not what it was intended for, and it's going
Correct.
to be completely inaccurate. If it was, you and I would have died 20 times over in the last couple of weeks because we probably surpassed it by 20 beats, right? So heart rate is may or may not be a gauge. Perceived rate of exertion, 1 to 10 is a decent gauge. But again, how many times you thought you were working hard and then you get in a competitive environment and then you find another gear you could work harder, right? And then you
Absolutely.
have local muscular fatigue. Like Mike and I talk about this a lot, and Mike does some really great stuff, and he has a whole book on talking about conditioning and testing and the difference of legs versus lungs and what's tapping out first. Is it gas exchange and measuring, factors within that? Is it metabolic measures, like you said, like lactate? And I'm going to circle back with some more questions and some theories with this that I think you and I have even talked about. But like, how do I even know what metric to measure that I'm getting the adaptation that I want?
Yes, that's a great question. And I think there's really not anything other than like a direct measure VO2 test, potentially looking at blood oxygenation, like the saturation rate within the blood and the muscle. Like, is there an exchange going on there? But again, those are not accessible to most population, right? I think probably one of the better ones is probably right rate of perceived exertion, or as as I think you guys call it, perceived rate of exertion, right? Pre. So I think that's probably a better one. But that could vary on the day as well, too. I mean, it could be based on hydration levels, sleep, so that there's a lot of variance there. Um, I personally think heart rate is probably the easiest one for most people to go to if they can somehow determine what an acceptable max heart rate is, right? So how would somebody do that, right? The easiest way to do that would be, take yourself out to the track on a bike, right, and really push yourself until you think you can't go any further. You're basically a 10 out of 10. Um, you're gasping for air, and you're looking at trying to match heart rate to that. But even that could be flawed and maybe not safe for the general population to do, right? So there's no great metric, right? I think we have to use what we feel is the best possible metric at that moment in time. Um, for me, I use a lot of max aerobic speed or sprint speed if I'm working with athletes. I look at anaerobic speed reserves and things like that. I think those are probably better based on the type of test that we do. For example, I could take somebody out and easily have them run a 1.5 mile run or 2,400 meters on a track and time it, divide that by time, and get meters per second, and then work off percentages of that. Those have a tendency to be a little bit better, in my opinion, because I'm taking heart rate out of it. I'm not even looking at heart rate. I might look at heart rate from a recovery perspective, or say, okay, last time we did this, you basically ran about the same, right? But now you're a little bit faster, but your heart rate's a lot lower. So we know there's a little bit more in the tank. We can push a little bit more. So that might be a better metric. But to give you an example, some of the things we're looking at in the lab or field now, right? So Moxy monitors. I don't know if you guys are familiar with those with muscle oxygenation saturation rates. I've actually worn them for my morning run, and I'm actually well above where I probably should be for the adaptation that I thought that I wanted. I thought I was going out for an easy run, and it was going to be more of an aerobic adaptation where I'm building, mitochondrial health, capillarization, right? All these things that we think are really good for longevity. And when I look at this, I'm well surpassed where I should be from a saturation rate. I've basically utilized as much of the oxygen that's available that I have, and I'm going from basically aerobic to an anaerobic state. So I'm probably not getting the actual adaptation that I thought I was going to get. Um, Again, costs money to do that. Actually, fortunately, I have grants and funding in the lab that I can have this equipment that I can then take out to the field, but it's really not accessible to the mass population. Although I think it's going to get there. I think we're going to start seeing this. I think wearables will start to be able to do so many things in maybe 3 to 5 years.
Okay, so here's some theoreticals I'm going to throw at you. So Perry, if you want to go get a cup of coffee or something, I'm going to be here a while. All right, so when we talk about cause and effect and adaptation and what we're using as the metric, so here's one example. So I've kind of stolen a hybrid of like what Brian McKenzie and Patrick McKeown does with breath holding, right, while exercising. So you go into a what we'll call zone two, for which we don't even know quite what it is, but we'll call zone two in that type of, low intense, higher end of your low intensity. And you're walking, you're riding a bike, whatever it is. And what I'll have people do is after they exhale, do a breath hold for as long as they comfortably can until they have an air hunger, resume their breathing, and do that every minute on the minute. What I notice happens if you watch on a heart rate monitor, you will see a drop and then a rise above and then a drop and a rise above. So if you look at your heart rate on a graph, if you're using like a Morpheus or anything like that, you'll see these hills, right? And so it looks from your heart rate like you just did interval training.
Yeah.
But I never sped up, I never added resistance, I never did anything except alter my breath. Now, is that going to create the same physiological effect as if I did change one of those things? Because my heart rate tells me so. My heart rate, if you looked at just that, it looks like I just did interval training, but all I did was hold my breath. Is that going to create the same response as an interval training session would?
Yeah, so that's so the breath hold with the peaks and valleys, right? So we have to look at, is the adaptation central or is it peripheral, right? Is it more of a central adaptation with the heart, or are there things happening on the periphery, right? So mitochondria, capillaries, right? The vascularization of the actual muscles in the system. Are things changing there, or are they changing central with basically just heart rate? So if you look at a study by McPherson where they did 4 weeks of either steady state training where they increased volume over time, 65% of VO2 max, 4 weeks, right? Went from 30 minutes to 35 to 40 to 45. They kept tearing up, right? The other group did sprint interval training where they did one set of 4 30-second sprints, very constructed rest periods. And then every week they added a set to that. They both groups actually increased their VO2 max by about 12%, right? What they found was the group that did the steady state training solely did it with stroke volume, right? So it was more of a central adaptation. The other group did it more at the periphery with more of like the enzymatic reactions that actually occur. So we can get there both ways, but it's really like, what do I want to get out of it? So I think with the breath holds, and we can look at that, and it would be interesting to look at that and then also look at the saturation rates that occur and see if there's any correlation. Because if you do an interval training with a Moxy monitor on and you peak your heart rate, as your heart rate goes up, you'll see your saturation go down. And then basically, as your heart rate comes down, the saturation rate goes back up, and you kind of know you're recovered, and then you could do it again. So it's a really interesting way to train. Like I said, I've worn them on runs, I've worn them on a bike. I use them in labs to teach this to my students that it's not only the heart rate, but there's other things going on. So is it, again, we have to look at it. Is it central? Is it peripheral? Is it a combination? And then what does the person actually need? Right? the one thing I like about the breath holds, I think that builds CO2 tolerance, which it's something that's something we've really started talking about within the last probably 3 to 5 years. I see it particularly with some of the runners that I've worked with, particularly my son and his group, right? They're middle distance guys, so they're under the gun for high power, high speed, but also high capabilities of endurance as well. So can they tolerate high levels of CO2? So I think that might be something to look at as well with those breath holds. Because I look at breath holds as building CO2 tolerance, but it's going to change the heart rate, right? Because the O2 and the CO2, right, are kind of combating each other. Which one's going to win, right? Eventually the CO2 is going to win and say, hey, we need some air in here.
What if your clients never left? The Forever Client Formula Challenge is a free 3-day experience for fitness pros who are tired of chasing leads and want to build a business with loyal, long-term clients. You'll learn the exact blueprint of the top 1% of coaches so you can create programs that get results, build deep trust, and keep clients coming back for more. If you're serious about coaching as a career and not just a side hustle, this is your next step. Spots are limited. Join us now at foreverclientformula.com. And now back to the show.
With that, it only brings up more questions. Say, well, then, okay, well, if it's a central versus a peripheral response, how do I know which one I need? Right. And so that becomes, you just keep asking, you become like the 2-year-old to keep asking the question after the question. All right. So I got two more that I'm going to pose for you. One we actually talked about last time we got together is when we talk about lactate. Right. We already discussed how like that's cumbersome and impractical for anybody to do. And I don't know if I want to be at the gym with the person pinpricking himself on the bike next to me. But one of the things I theorized to you was I was being my own guinea pig, as we often do, and I was wearing a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. And what I noticed is the thing that had the biggest impact in terms of spiking my blood sugar was when I did high intensity intervals. And what I noticed that when I did what I, kind of guessed and theorized would be my zone two, no blood sugar change. Makes sense, right? So the higher intensity, the more demand for energy right now. So sugar is going to get released into the blood. You've cracked your lactate threshold. So the question was, could you then, which would be a little bit more user friendly, could a CGM be used as a proxy for looking at lactate threshold?
I think it could. I think it could. I mean, the first time I heard that was when you posed that question to me a few months ago, and I've been thinking about that, and I think what we need to do, I think we need to actually take that theory into the lab and actually layer that, right? Let's look at it from glucose. Let's look at it from respiratory exchange ratio. Like where's the fuel source coming from? Because that's gonna, when that gets to a certain point, at the low end, we're getting more of our fuel from fat, right? At the high end, it's almost strictly carbohydrate. So we could look at that and then layer those things in and say, okay, what do we think we see, right? Continuous glucose, we know that if it goes up, obviously the demand for the glycolytic cycle has to kick in. At the lower end, right, we can possibly be a little bit more on the fat side. We could also look at that from a perspective of saying, okay, individually, right, because everything comes down to like N of one, right? What I do and how it affects me might not affect Mike or you, the same way. Things are going to be different. But if we can kind of come up with a proxy marker, and really that's what lactate is. It's a proxy marker for intensity. It's a little bit different for everybody, but everybody kind of hits the same things. So I think with continuous glucose monitoring, I think that's a great way to look at it because it's letting you know that the body needs more energy from a certain system, right? Which means we're going to have to tap into our glucose or glycogen stores, which means we're going more towards that anaerobic cycle versus the oxidative cycle.
Last one theory I'm going to pose for you, or kind of question that kind of questions metrics is VO2 max is kind of this gold standard and especially become super, popularized as of late, where you have people asking and talking about their VO2 max you would have never imagined 10 years ago. But here's the thing is that the other thing we haven't talked about in terms of a confounding factor is skill, right? So if I test my VO2 max, and I've recently done it with proxy tests, if I do it on a treadmill versus a bike versus the rower, I get 3 different scores. So what's my VO2 max? Well, it's relative to my skill. I have a bike at home that I do the majority of my, my cardio stuff, especially my longer stuff. I don't do a lot of, running other than some sprint work. And the rower, if I hit it every other week, so those numbers are reflective in accumulation that I've had and skill that I have for each of those activities. So then how am I going to know what is my real VO2?
Huh. Yeah, great question. So why would you pick one over the other?
Well, that's the one thing I tell clients is like, what are you most skilled and most comfortable in, right? Because then you could look in factors like if it's uncomfortable, like if it hurts to run for somebody, that's going to create a sympathetic response, which will elevate heart rate, which will have you gas out sooner, and like that's another factor in there. So like I'm always telling people, what are you most comfortable with? What doesn't hurt, and what are you the best at, and you use most commonly? Because that's going to probably give us the most accurate result. But I say that completely making that up, at a best guess. I'm asking you, as the guy who tests it all the time, how do we know what our real VO2 max is?
So the all those tests are great, right? They're all so the field-based testing, whether it's a 1.5 mile run, a 12-minute walk run, Rockport mile walk, it could be a 12-minute bike test, it could be something on a rower. Most of the companies have their own um, fitness assessments built into the machine itself. Like if you go to life, like onto a life cycle, you can go on and like their programs, and you can see different types of programs. All of them are probably flawed comparatively to an actual VO2 test in a lab with gas exchange, right? Which is becoming more common now. I mean, if you look at some of the higher level health clubs and gyms, they're offering these types of services at really not that inexpensive of a price, to be honest with you, right? Like back in the day, it would probably cost you $300 to $400 to get a VO2 test. Now you could probably get one for somewhere between 100 to 200. It really depends on where you go. Those are probably the best ones because those are direct measure of oxygen versus carbon dioxide exchange, right? Having said that, a basic treadmill test for the general population is probably the best test, like a standardized Bruce ramp, like modified Bruce ramp or a bulky. Those are probably tests that are pretty easily administered, and they're easily administered. And I know this because we use them with our most fragile populations, right? Elderly cardiac rehab. So everybody can walk for the most part. So a walking based test that eventually will tap you out based on not only speed, but more on the incline side are probably the better test. The bottom line is whatever test you're going to use should be the test that you always use. This way you can have a pre to post test comparison. I'll give you an example. If I go today and I do a 1.5 mile run and I time it, and then I say, okay, my VO2 is this, and then 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now, I want to reassess my fitness and I hop on a bike, I'm going to get a totally different score, right? So we're not doing the same thing. So the test itself, all the field tests are probably flawed inherently, but they're good enough to at least have a marker from a pre-test to a post-test to a post-test to track progress, right? And then you can layer in different other aspects like heart rate recovery, RPE. Those are really, really great things to measure, right? Because those give you information of how you're doing at that moment in time comparatively to a test that you did 2, 3 weeks ago at that same moment in time, right? Takes a little bit of work. You might need a workout partner to sit there and record for you, but those are probably the better things to do. But to me, it doesn't matter what the test is. It just has to be the same test all the time, knowing that we're not going to get an exact measure.
No, it's almost like body fat testing, right? You get a
Yep.
DEXA versus a skin fold caliber versus an InBody versus a Sika. Like they're all going to be wildly different from each other, but none of them are inherently 100% accurate. It's just a matter of is it a measure for progress is ultimately what you're looking
Yep.
at. And the other thing that you mentioned that kind of is going to make this a little bit easier and a little more accessible is that the wearables are on track to where they're going to have wearables that integrate CGM. They're going to have wearables that are a little bit more accurate on looking at some of these metrics and being able to blend some together. Now, the other thing that you also mentioned that I want to circle back to is that we may still not know cause and effect because there's so many contributing factors. So if I do my VO2 max on the, and we used to get this question all the time with FMS and say, okay, well, do I do it before a workout? Do I warm up? Do I do? And it's like I want as many of the factors as replicated as possible. Like ideally, you would do it on the same day of the week at the same time, wearing the same clothes, listen to the same music on the way here that you did have the same meal for dinner the night before. But how practical is that going to be? Because how much your sleep could completely change, something, how much your nutrition can change something, how much your stress can change something. All those things that will now skew what you're using as data and then using that data to make all your programming decisions on. So, how do we best create the most reproducible environment when we're dealing with dynamic mosaic human beings that are living real lives?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hard part. That's the hard part because no one's going to go through the same extent of developing a process like we would, right? As coaches, as a physiologist, we have a certain way of doing things that we want the best process, we want the best data. So most people are not going to do that. Most people are not going to be, uh, you know, tracking hydration level. Are they tracking sleep? I think we're with wearables, we're getting better at doing things like that, but we're still not there. So, the one thing I like to look at is how does this feel at this moment in time? Am I at a certain pace or a certain level or RPM or wattage on a bike? What is my heart rate response at that moment in time? Right? If I drop it down, does it recover? Does it not recover? Right? So these are little intricate details that we as coaches would look for and want, right? The other thing I'll say this too is like, we talked about testing. If we're going to do a test, are we actually utilizing the data we collect during the test to program, right? Versus saying, okay, here's my VO2, here's where it's at right now, here's where I want it to go, and then programming, but not utilizing that actual assessment to drive to prescription. That's a common fault that I see with coaches. We do one thing and then we jump from A to B. We don't do all the little things in between to get there.
The last point, and this kind of circles back what we were talking about at the beginning, where we've gotten better with programming. I think where we still need to get better is understanding the end user better and being better at meeting them where they're at. So like when I do an initial assessment with somebody, I explain to them there's a continuum of fitness, right? And the two ends that I use as my example is, all right, on this end you have Brian Johnson, right? And if they don't know who Brian Johnson is, I explain it. I'm like, Brian Johnson is a guy who sold his tech company for millions and millions and millions of dollars. There's a Netflix special about him, and where he's this ultra optimizer, and he measures and tracks every single thing to a maniacal level. Sleeps in a sleep pod, takes as a closet full of supplements, checks his blood every day, does every single measure that you can take on a human being. He does, and he's the first person to tell you that that is not an achievable or livable life for anybody, right? But that is as extreme as you can get. If you took somebody and says, take everything that is out there to quote unquote self-optimize, he does it. And then on the other end of this continuum, you have that friend or relative that if you could just get them off the couch and get them to go for a walk a couple times a week, you'd drastically improve their life, right? And then there's everything in between. And you have to kind of find out from the individual, well, how deep do you want to go? Which end of the continuum, where do you plot yourself? Do you want to be weighing and measuring your food and tracking your macros, or do we just need to get you to stop eating crap, right? Do you want to be looking at your HRV every morning, or do you want to just go out and say you're either going to work kind of easy, kind of somewhere in the middle, or really hard today? Like, so understanding people where they're at, I think, is a lost art that I think a lot of coaches and trainers need to develop.
Yeah, I think, listen, not everyone needs the same thing. Not everyone wants the same thing. Not everyone is willing to do the same thing, right? So if I can get somebody, like you said, if I can get them to work, you know, at a moderate intensity on an RPE scale of a 4 to 5, versus sitting on a couch at an RPE of 0, we're making progress, right? Like any steps in a positive direction. So it's different based on the clientele. Like if I'm working with an athlete, we're going to track different things. We're gonna monitor things differently. If I'm working with a general pop, it's really just asking questions. We talk about like athlete monitoring or all these monitoring, devices, but ask them, what'd you do last night? How'd you sleep? Right? How's your diet been? What'd you do yesterday? How's work? Did you travel? Right? That gives me just as much information as looking at a radar plot of sleep, hydration, right? I mean, I don't need all that. I can just ask the question and I'll probably gain more information, right? But that's that lost art of coaching. I think the integration of wearables were to do that, or maybe we're just not taking the actual time to do that, right? So it was funny. I was asked last year at an NSCA conference. I was on a panel, and they said, what would be my advice to the next generation, right? And I said, don't worry about AI. I said, and don't even worry about performance. I said, really, the most important aspect of human performance is the human, right? So deal with the human, know how they react to certain things, and meet them where they're at. That's going to give us a lot more information than just saying, "Hey, let's monitor this, let's monitor that." It's not feasible. It's not real. It's not realistic. Nobody wants to do it all the time.
Yeah. So kind of changing gears a little bit. Now that you're in college academics and you see many university programs just not really preparing the individuals for what they need and to be successful. Where do you see the industry going, and how do you think we can help? Not us specifically, but as sort of people that have been in it for a while, how can we help?
Great question. So it's a concept I call coaches in the classroom. We need more coaches in the classroom. Basically, right? It sounds really big. Coaches in the classroom, and it sounds like a big concept, but it's really just we need more people like us in there actually teaching, right? So we could layer in all the theory, and they're going to read how the students consume knowledge now is totally different than how we did. Like, I actually have them listen to podcasts, right? I have them read articles. It's not just about a textbook. So I think the biggest things we can do is teach them how to take the knowledge, the basic knowledge, and really just apply it. Everything has to be applicable. If you can't apply it after hearing it, we didn't teach it to you the right way. So I tell them, I said, my classrooms, my lectures or labs, whatever you want to call them, I said, I want it to feel like a workshop. When you leave here, there should be one thing that you can take with you and apply to your training that day. If not, I missed my mark. I didn't do my job, right? So I actually tell my students, don't even call me Professor Burns. Don't call me Mr. Burns. You can call me Coach, is fine. If you want to call me Professor Burns, that's okay. But I'm really a coach in the classroom. So I think academically, we need more of that. We also need more embedded experience right from the get-go. And it's hard because they don't have the prerequisite knowledge to do that, particularly at some of the smaller schools like mine. We're a 2-year program. So by the time they're really ready to go out and coach, they're just about ready to leave as well, and they're usually transferring. But if I can embed as much experience into the classroom environment or into lab environment or something on campus, whatever it might be, that's going to put them tenfold ahead of somebody who comes out with a 4-year degree that's never done any of that. Right? Give you a great example. One of the reasons I got into the academic side, I left the coaching side, was because I was interviewing uh, for assistants when I used to work in professional baseball, and I couldn't believe how many people came to me, knew all this stuff about the Krebs cycle, sliding filament theory, and had never coached anybody live. And I said, so here I'm going to put you in front of 25 to 30 professional baseball players, and you've never done this before. That's a really bad model, right? You shouldn't get to that point and not have done it before. So in the classroom, in the labs, right, we have to embed that experience. We have to have them on campus. They're testing each other. Like my lab is not a research lab; it's a teaching lab. We're in there every week. The students are using the equipment on themselves, or using it on their friends, classmates. eventually we want to take that model and say, let's start offering it to other faculty and staff, like have an open lab day where people can come in and do testing. So my students can see, right, see it in real time. What's actually happening to the body when they're doing these testing, but also gives them that human experience that they need. Eventually, you're going to have to be able to talk to people, right? It's not just about an app. It's not just about your phone. So the we're doing a better job. We're not doing a great job, but we're doing a better job. Um, and I think we're kind of our own worst enemies, and we kind of we stop before we start. Like I think we're scared to pull the plug and say, hey, this is the model that needs to change, and this is the way forward. And I think academically, we're like so worried about accreditation that we just don't do it.
Well, I'm gonna tell you that you're doing a great job down there, and it's been a privilege for me to be part of the advisory board down with the school because you're doing things that not a lot of programs are doing. And when you talk about coaching the classroom, you're actively recruiting people like myself and Dr. Adam Wright, who we've had on the show, who's a friend of ours, to be involved and to a couple times a year get us on a call or bring us in and say, all right, what's going on out there? What are you seeing? What's happening in the field? And so we can stay a step ahead of it. So we don't realize 10 years down the road, we probably should have done this. And by the time we implement those changes, it's already too late. It's passed us by. And so talk about how commercial fitness and performance, people like Mike and myself, how we can work more with college programs like yours for mutually beneficial partnerships.
Yeah, that's a great concept. I think any college that wouldn't want some sort of collaboration, specifically with what you guys are doing, right, is crazy because you are doing things. You're taking our curriculum, right? You're taking a 4-year curriculum, or in my case, a 2-year curriculum, and you've condensed it down into something that's much more manageable and meaningful, right? And it's done in a shorter amount of time. So we say, well, we need 14 or 15 weeks to teach this concept. Do we? Do we actually really need 14 or 15 weeks to teach that? So I think we need more collaboration, right? I constantly look for local gyms in the area that are willing to have my students come out, even if it's just for a day or two. It doesn't have to be an official internship, right? Or even better yet, would they want to come in, right? Let's have you come in and talk to my students, right? Show them what's going on in the field, show them what could be done, right? But also get some feedback from students that are new and say, you know what? That might not be the way forward, right? We're younger. We're regardless of who we are in the field and how long we've been in, we're kind of still set in our own ways. I think we think outside the box, but I think we just go to different corners of the box. I don't think we ever really get outside of it. But we think we are. I think we need to be challenged a little bit more. And I think this younger generation of I call them health and human performance professionals. I think that's a better term than trainer or coach because it's for health, for human performance, for both. I think they're really in tune to what's what's going on in the gyms. I think they're more in tune with some of the trends, good and bad, that are happening versus academics, right? And I don't even like to call myself an academic because I consider myself more of a coach. The term I like is pracademic, right? I'm a practical academic. I like to take things and be able to apply them. So collaboration is going to be a huge part of that. Internships, co-ops, whatever you want to call it, we have to get our students out there. And I think students need to realize too that it doesn't have to be just for a grade. Like I think the minute you step on a college campus, university, you find ways to be involved with the faculty in programs and even outreach on outside of that. It's not just about waiting until you're a junior or senior and you have to fulfill 3 credits of a internship requirement. At that point, it's already too late.
And so one, don't hear what Keith's not saying. This doesn't mean for us that we can go knock on Keith's door and, hey, can you send me some free towel folders for the next 3 months that I can check the box for their internship? It's really giving something back and paying it forward and letting them be part of your staff education meetings, letting them kind of actually, grab you at a set time, during the week to say, all right, I watched 5 year sessions and I have a list of questions. Why'd you do this with this person? What is this though? And all those types of things and be able to share that so they can see it. And then the other part of it is, like you said, going in, which we love doing. We just did this 2 weeks ago with a group where we'll go in and answer questions and kind of let them know, like, what this actually looks like as a career, which our industry does a really crappy job of doing. And that's why we have the, what we call them the 6 to 24s, where the average lifespan of a coach or trainer in the fitness side is 6 to 24 months. And you had people who were super passionate, really wanted to help people, but nobody gave them any guidance into like what this actually looks like as a career.
Yeah.
And then they leave and go do something else. Cause, we joke that they did trainer math. They start thinking, oh, well, you can charge $100 a session and I'm going to do 40 sessions a week. I'm going to be making six figures. And it's like, that's not how it works. Like, you don't understand. Like, 40 people aren't waiting for you to graduate to give you $100. You have to earn that right. And then when you do get that right, they don't come in at 1 in the afternoon. They come in at 6 in the morning before they got to go to work so they can afford to pay you $100. And all these little things that don't sink into the brain of somebody who's aspirational and who wants to do this because they don't know the practical side of the career aspect of this. And then also all the different possibilities that have now become available that weren't available when all the three of us started. There wasn't virtual coaching. There wasn't the ability to deliver your services via a really a professional looking app. There wasn't the ability to go and get involved in so many different corners of the industry that are now available to us. It's not as simple as go out, I'm going to work at a gym, be a personal trainer, and then open up my own place. There's a lot more different options that you can entertain that are all viable career options if you have somebody who has a little bit of experience and can give you that mentorship as to guiding you what is kind of the best fit for you.
Yeah, and that's why we need you guys in the classroom, right? That's why we need coaches in the classroom. Because if you look at, I mean, look at most academic majors and disciplines, right? You come out, right? If you're on faculty, you come out with a bachelor's, you go for your master's, you then go for your PhD, and then you go into teaching. Where's the industry experience, right? So I think having someone who's been on the coaching side that then turns into more of the academic side is much more meaningful. We can deliver a different experience academically. We can provide examples. We can coach and guide the student based on their interests, right? And then let them know about the pitfalls, because that's not if you take a intro to exercise science class, I don't think they're telling you that you're going to be working split shift, 5 a.m. to 9, and then hopefully getting your workout in, and then working again from 4:30 p.m. to 9, right? And then trying to do that 5-6 days a week to make a living, and then after 6 months you're exhausted, right? Because you're sleeping on a couch at the gym, right? Or in your car in between sessions because you have to be there so early, but you're still there so late. They don't teach you that, right? Those are the things we don't teach in college, right? Those are things we talk about, right? If the faculty member has some experience with that, but again, if you're coming out and going straight from bachelor's to PhD and then right into teaching because you want to do research, that's great. But I don't think that's doing our students that great of a service.
Or like when I was in school, we had you either did ex-phys, you did teacher cert to do phys
Yep.
ed, or you did athletic training. And I remember being in a class called Careers in Exercise Science, and all the athletic training students, every single one of them, I'm going to be the trainer for the Knicks. Yeah, I'm going to be the trainer for the Giants. I'm going to be the trainer for the Rangers. It's like, no, you're not. You're going to be doing JV girls volleyball
Yep.
at 9 o'clock on a Monday night. And
Yeah.
so with that, like we joked about when you and Adam and I were together last time, we were talking about like the glories of, oh, I'm going to work in professional sports. Tell us a little bit about like where you lived when you were working in professional sports and you first started out.
Yeah, so gosh, my first position in professional sports, I was with the Chicago White Sox. I was living in Iowa, right? And honestly, I've been very fortunate, right? I don't know that many people that said, "Hey, I want to be a professional strength coach in baseball," and then made it right away. And part of it's timing when I went in. But I was extremely lucky. I mean, before that, I was working I was at a health club doing personal training and also managing. But I was like, I really want to be more of a strength and conditioning coach because the clientele I had were all athletes. And I said, I really want to work in professional baseball. And it just so happens I was able to get that opportunity to do it. And then I did that for the next 5 years or so, and kind of climbed my way up the ladder, just like the players do. But I was on, 14, 15-hour bus rides in the middle of Iowa where I fell asleep looking at corn and I woke up looking at corn. And our meals were, you brought a loaf of bread, a jar of jelly, right, and a jar of peanut butter and a plastic knife, and that was your meals for the next 4 days on a 4 day, away trip. And then you came back, and then the peanut butter might have been a little bit better, and the bread might have been a little bit fresher, but that's the same thing you kind of ate when you were home too. So it didn't. It's not as glorious and glamorous as people make it out to be. It's not. Not everyone's standing in the middle of Yankee Stadium out in the outfield, watching players warm up. It's you know games where there's 200 or 300 people watching in the middle of Iowa. You might get more at a local high school baseball game that's a town to town rival than you would get in some of these other leagues.
And the one double A guy I was training, he said he put on 30 pounds in one year because basically their meals were whatever they didn't sell at the snack stand. And so they got like pretzels and bags of popcorn and hot dogs
Yep.
as their meals.
It's pretty accurate, right? And the discrepancy as you move up, I mean, it changes drastically. What the meals look like in AAA versus what they look like in single A, and some of that's flattened out over the years because they have better compliance on that and better standards, I should say. So, but back in this is back in 1998, so it's a long time ago. So I mean, wasn't a very comfortable bus ride.
Yeah, and the same guy sent me a picture when he got the call up into the bigs and he was playing against the Dodgers and he was at the Four Seasons in LA and he showed me his menu that he had to choose from. Very different from popcorn and hot dogs.
Very different.
All right. So as we put a bow on this, we have one last question for you. What are you working on, and what can we look forward to in the near future?
Great question. So near future, uh, I'm actually presenting at the New Jersey NSCA State Clinic on May 2nd. Working on a model that I use. It's actually a case study. I'm going to present a case study on a concept I called fast to fit. So I had a collegiate field hockey player that needed to pass her conditioning test, and she had never passed it in her freshman, sophomore, junior year. She was going into her senior year, really wanted to pass it. Um, and this is kind of leads into like a lot of the stuff we talked about before about why are you doing the assessment and what information you're actually getting out of it. So we she was never going to make it based on her max velocity. So we worked on max velocity. When we looked at the assessment that she had to do, and I looked at her max velocity, I said, "You're so close at the end of the test that you're never going to be able to make it while you're fatigued." Yes, and you can't even get there when you're fully recovered. So we worked a lot on speed. So I'm actually going to be presenting on that. So I'm really excited for that one because I think it's a concept that we don't often think about how speed and max velocity training actually raises, it's a tide that raises everything else, so to speak. So it helps with acceleration. It helps with maximal capacity, repeatability. So I think so. I'm really really excited about that. The other thing is I've been working on this conditioning model for youth soccer, and I'm just kind of getting ready to unveil that with a local soccer club that I'm working with.
Awesome. And make sure you check it out if you're in the New Jersey area. I know our mutual friend and someone we've had on the show, Angelo Gigarelli, puts on an incredible conference for New Jersey, does great work there. So definitely go check that out if you're in the area, depending on when you listen to this. And then Keith, appreciate the friendship and working together for all these years. Hopefully you can do it for many, many more. And we're going to cut you off now because if I made it almost the whole show without you and Mike nerding out about lacrosse, because if that can of worms gets open,
Oh yeah, we'll have to do that, at some other point.
Definitely, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so
We just kick Eric
we'll
out.
circle,
He
we'll
just wants
circle,
to talk about cannolis.
yeah, we'll circle back on that later. But again, thank you again, Keith. Greatly appreciate it. This is awesome.
Thanks, Mike. Eric, I appreciate it. Eric, it's been a pleasure being your friend and colleague the past.
He froze again. And you're gonna have to you're gonna have to come back and give the accolades again. I think I
Ah,
froze him I froze it on purpose, so I have to hear it twice.
yeah, give me 1 second. All right. Ready?
Let's go.
Mike, Eric, thank you again. I really appreciate it. Eric, I really appreciate our friendship over the past few years since I first stalked you at the TPI clinic. up in North Jersey. So that was a nice way to enhance my network and meet you. So I look forward to many, many years of you coming to my state advisor, or the Raritan Valley Community College Advisory Committee for Exercise Science.
Awesome. And anytime you need some guest speakers, Mike and I are always game. And the
100%.
lesson to take away, kids, if you're a rock star fitness education person like Mike and myself, be kind to your stalkers because you never know where it'll take you.
That's right.
All right. Thank you for listening. And this has been the Principles of Performance Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Principles of Performance Podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please be sure to give us a 5-star review on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to learn more about our courses and mentorship program, visit www.principlesofprogramdesign.com, where you can book a free strategy call with Mike and Eric to gain insight on how to achieve your potential. Also use the special discount code PRINCIPLESPODCAST10 to receive 10% off any of our live or online courses. We appreciate your attention and your commitment to be your very best.